Mr. Speaker, Representative Bowie moves a call from the calendar, House Bill 166, that was returned earlier this afternoon, relative to the Recovery School District, require the transfer of certain schools from the RSD to the local school systems.
All right, Representative Bowie, on your second bill.
And Mr. Speaker, Representative Bowie has a technical amendment he offers on the bill.
Any objection to adoption of the technical amendment? Without objection. All right, Representative Bowie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, House Bill 166 actually attempts to accomplish three things. One, it realigns the original intent and letter of the law for returning schools that are no longer failing from the Recovery School District to the locally elected school board and district. Secondly, it provides time limits for such transfer. And thirdly, it requires that when a school is returned to the district from which it was transferred, all rights and responsibilities of ownership regarding land, buildings, facilities, and other property that are part of the school shall also be returned to the school board. Now, it's very important to understand that in 2003, the people of Louisiana, through a constitutional amendment, voted for the recovery school model. It also, at that time, provided the return of schools as it related to the recovery school model. Today, what is the practice for returning schools actually is illegal. The law says that when a school is no longer failing, that a recommendation is made to the Betsy Board by RSD, who then must have a public hearing with the local residents, constituents, and stakeholders as to whether that school should return or remain with RSD. Unfortunately, RSD and Betsy abdicated its fiduciary responsibility and passed a policy that gives charters, who are contractors, the authority to decide whether they will remain with RSD or return back to the local school district. Now, this creates two problems. The first problem it creates is that it now takes what was designed as a temporary state entity and positions it now to be a permanent bureaucracy, because presently there are 48 schools that are ready to come back that are being warehoused with the Recovery School District, 46 in New Orleans, 1 in Cato Parish, and 1 in East Baton Rouge Parish. And so here is what will be missed if, in fact, something isn't done legislatively in terms of ensuring that we reinforce what the law said originally. We will have a situation where the city of New Orleans in particular will miss a great opportunity. We have just elected a new superintendent, and when I approached this bill, I met with the charter associations, I met with Patrick Dobart, and I met with John White, superintendent, and talked about the opportunity we have here to be able to truly deal with a collaborative effort to bring schools back and move forward with providing the best environment for our children. And so that's basically what this bill attempts to do, is to originally do what the original Act 9 did, including the return of schools, because presently we are using an illegal return of school process. I'm open for any questions at this time.
Representative Carter for question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Bowie, congrats on your first bill. Well done.
Thank you.
You know, we had a lengthy debate in the House Education Committee on this particular bill. I've got a number of questions, if you don't mind. I just want to reiterate and try to get some answers for you. We currently have a process in place now to return the RSD schools to the OPSB. But you said that we're in violation. If there's a current process in place and it seems to be working, how are we in violation of this process?
Chairman Carter, we are in violation because in 2008, an amendment was done to section C1, which addressed the return of schools. And it says the following. It says that at the end of the initial transfer period, that schools may be returned to the system from which it was transferred unless the school is continued in the recovery district in accordance with provisions of paragraph 3 of this subsection. But here's what it says. It says that the recovery school district should make a recommendation to the Bessie Board. And it says, additionally, no later than 6 months prior to the expiration of the initial or subsequent transfer, the State Board shall conduct a public hearing within the jurisdiction of the city, parish, or other local public school board from which the school was transferred, relative to whether the school should be continued in the recovery district or returned to the system. Presently, there is nothing that RSD or Bessie does relative to doing any of that. The decision to do that was given to the charter groups, which are contractors, and they're the ones who have at their regular advisory board meetings a decision to either stay or go back to the local district. And the problem is not one school, except one in the last 10 years, has chosen to go back. And that school decided to go back because there was some disagreement with RSD.
Okay, with that in mind, I believe you have a new superintendent that just came on board.
That's correct.
Okay.
Dr. Lewis.
Yes, sir. And as I understand it, if it's true, that the Orleans Parish School Board superintendent, the new superintendent, was recently quoted in the New Orleans Advocate saying that he's not sure if OPSB is ready yet with the infrastructure to take back these schools and ensure the continued success. My point is there is a process in place right now. One school did move back to the public school, but right now he doesn't think that the structure, the way it's structured now, that these schools should be brought back into the OPSB. That was his quote.
You know, Chairman Carter, you can't believe everything you read in the papers. And Dr. Lewis happens to be here. And what we know about his commitment and his words are that he is looking forward to the schools coming back. And in fact, what the members have is a resolution by the school board that says they want the schools back. And I can tell you, Dr. Lewis also wants those schools back. He's here somewhere, and if he's here, if you want to ask him, I'm sure he would be more than happy to tell you what he feels about the schools coming back.
I respect your opinion. I'm just reading what was a quote in the paper. That's unbelievable. Okay, according to a public poll released by the Tulane Cowan Institute last week, almost 60% of the public either believes the current return policy should remain in place and/or they do not favor an immediate return. That was according to a poll that was released by the Cowan Institute. Were you aware of that?
I'm not, but you know, I learned a long time ago that the only poll that matters is the voting poll. And the people of Louisiana voted for the return process that's in Chapter 9.
Please let us debate the bills. Representative Bowie?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Yeah, what I was saying, Representative Carter, was that the people of Louisiana voted for the return of schools that was in the constitutional amendment that was passed in 2003.
Do you think that the mandatory return, Representative Bowie, if these schools are returned to the OSB, do you feel like that any incentive for them to improve the structure and the infrastructure, as according to the superintendent saying that they have problems, will there be any incentive for them to continue to improve them?
Yes, sir. Before I answer that question, I would just like to ask the contingency from New Orleans to please maintain the decor of the House floor so that we can actually have the debate. Thank you very much. Ms. Carter, I definitely do, and here's the reason why. This legislature put a number of mechanisms in place that will ensure the integrity of the recovery model. For instance, when schools come back, they don't go back to an old model. The new model of education in Louisiana, we use charter groups. And so when those schools go back, the charter groups go back with them. Those charter associations that brought them up, they also go back. Another point, because when I met with the charter associations, they were concerned about things like differential funding and their funding capacity. When the schools go back, by law, they go back as a 3B type charter, which means they actually maintain their LEA status, so which means their funding source, their revenue stream is not impacted. Another concern they had was, well, what happens if there's micromanagement of the board? That cannot happen because this legislature passed Act 193, which prevented micromanagement. So everything is in place that will ensure the integrity of the success that is happening with the schools. The only thing that's different is that instead of the temporary state entity responsible for governance, the constitutionally protected and community elected board and district will be the governance structure.
Right. Well, my concern is this, that it seems to me, and I'm just going to read a couple of statistics, I'm going to ask you your opinion. The high-performing public charter schools in New Orleans have moved the graduation rates from 54% to 73% since 2004. College enrollment has jumped from 45% to 58%, and the number of students eligible for the TOPS Merit Scholarship has increased from 25 to 37% in the last 6 years. My question is, why would you want to change something that seems to be working when there is a process in place that enables them to move to the Orleans Parish School Board? Why would you want to change something that seems to be working?
Because the change only addresses the governance. Everything you mentioned in terms of how those schools got to be able to profess those statistics will still be in place. Those charter associations come back with the schools and they will operate the same way they're operating now, except they will be under the governance of the community elected district board.
Representative Jones for a question on the bill.
Representative Bowie, back here.
Yes, sir.
As far as you know, the Recovery School District is funded by the state budget, isn't it?
Yes.
In the meantime, after all of the schools were shifted over to the RSD, the Orleans Parish School Board continued to collect their millages and their taxes. Is that a fair question?
Repeat that again. I couldn't understand.
As far as you know, during the time after, but since the schools were moved to the RSD in 2007 or whenever it was, 5, did the Orleans Parish School Board continue to collect the taxes that they have always collected on millages and sales taxes?
They did. However, just very recently, Act 543, which was authored by Representative Leger, actually passed a bill, this legislature did, that gives some of the sales tax and the millage money will now go with the students, and the students happen to be with RSD. So what will happen is when those schools return, the taxpayers' monies will return to the local district as well.
And the balance of what the rest of the state has been paying to the RSD will also be diminished. Wouldn't you say that's a fair statement?
Yes. In fact, there's a 2% charge that RSD has been charging the charters. 1.75 of that goes to RSD, 0.25 goes to the Department of Education. Those funds will also go back to the local district as well.
So your testimony to us is that probably this would save the state money for the schools that would choose to go back, and that amount that the state's having to put up in RSD would be diminished.
It will save the state a lot of money, because one of the problems is that there is no single point of accountability. And just recently, a big article came out about the kinds of non-accountability that is with, unfortunately, the Recovery School District. There are hundreds of millions of dollars in property that's not accounted for, and so there are serious issues of accountability. And so this will eliminate that by returning to a single point accountability, the elected school board and district.
And so it's the intent of your bill to make sure that the state does not become a permanent operator or become the nanny state for New Orleans.
That is correct, sir. In fact, by design and by law, the Recovery School District was to be a temporary entity. But the present practice of returning to schools positions them to be a permanent bureaucracy, which will cost the state serious money.
And thereby just making this government bigger and bigger here in Baton Rouge.
Yes, sir.
So you're a fiscal conservative, aren't you?
To that extent, I am. Yes, yes, sir.
All right, to the floor on the bill, Representative Abramson.
You mind if I move this so I don't mess up your stuff? You take my notes so you won't mess up. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Fellow members, I rise in opposition to the bill. Let me begin before I get to the merits. This is a very hard one for me to rise in opposition because of my seatmate here, so it's not about the author, it's about the merits of the bill. And let me just share with you one other thing. Since this is now his second bill, you have the comfort of already voting for his first bill. And so Representative Bowie, if he goes 1 for 2, that's a great batting average. Let me tell you why I'm opposed to the bill. There's 3 reasons. One is I want to address the legal issue because there's a court case right on point, and everything the way it's set up has already been determined by the court system to be constitutional, and I'll tell you about that. The second one is the Orleans Parish School Board is just simply not ready. The superintendent who was recently hired has himself said they're not ready. They have to do a lot of things to get ready before they can accept these schools back, and it would be to the detriment of the parents, the teachers, the principals, and the students if we return them this time. And this is from the gentleman who is charged with running the schools. They're not ready. And the third thing is there is consensus in New Orleans that the school board and the superintendent are not ready. There's consensus geographically all across New Orleans, and I will explain that to you. There is consensus racially, white and African American. This is not a racial issue, and I'm going to show you that in all of the schools. There's consensus in the schools that they do not want to return at this time. Let me begin with the legal issue. I have before me the Louisiana Court of Appeal for the First Circuit. Judgment rendered August 14th, 2013. The exact issue that was brought up today was litigated. Here it is. According to the petitions brought by the Orleans Parish School Board, it is alleged that the RSD exceeded their constitutional authority by retaining control over non-failing OPSB schools that had been transferred from the jurisdiction of the OPSB to Bessie Administrated Recovery School District, RSD. OPSB sought a judgment declaring that the attempts by the RSD to retain control over non-failing schools or otherwise interfere with the business affairs of the OPSB exceeded their constitutional and statutory limits of their authority. The trial court here in Baton Rouge ruled against them. It then went up to the First Circuit Court of Appeal, and I read, contrary to the school board's arguments, these statutes, along with the guidelines set forth in Bulletin 111, which is the Bessie Bulletin that was referred to by Representative Bowie that gives the charter schools the authority to make these decisions, allow the RSD to not only retain jurisdiction over schools that may no longer be considered failing, but also to impose conditions upon schools that may be returned to the jurisdiction of the transferring system. As correctly noted by RSD in briefs to this court, it cites the statutes and it says it shows the legislative intent to allow for formerly failing schools to remain with the RSD beyond the time that their school performance scores rise above the failing level. These statutes are clearly confer upon Bessie the discretion to determine when and under what conditions and stipulations an RSD school is to be returned to the jurisdiction of a local school board. Thus, we affirm the trial court's ruling, deny the OPSB's request. This has been litigated. It's constitutional, it's statutory, the system in place is what it is. Now let's get to the merits of the bill and the policy arguments. The Orleans Parish School Board is simply not ready, and the superintendent has stated that on a number of occasions. We have a new superintendent, Henderson Lewis Jr., who was recently brought in after 2.5 years of the school board not being able to agree on a permanent new superintendent. We've been having an interim one for 2.5 years.
Representative Abramson, excuse me, Representative Norton, why do you rise?
Mr. Speaker, I rise for the 5-minute rule, please.
All right.
Thank you.
Without objection. Sorry, Representative. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. He was quoted when he was asked about Representative Bowie's bill that would compel eligible schools to come back to the RSD. Lewis said he wasn't sure whether the district would be ready for it. He pointed out that some of the most important functions of any central office in a charter-dominated school system are still carried out by RSD, including central enrollment and the hearing office for students facing expulsion. It says his plan was to work with the RSD to begin the process to bringing those functions back to OPSB when they're ready, when they have the infrastructure to accept it. A couple weeks later, which was last month, he's quoted again in another article where he states, he needs to cut staff in the Orleans Parish School System Central Office. He needs to improve employee ethics, and he needs to clean up contracts to restore trust in the school board. His job was to create an infrastructure that can accommodate the new schools coming back when they come back. He says we're overstaffed, we need to cut back, and we need to push the money down to the schools where it belongs. He might even have to terminate some of the contracts that have gone on for years with little results. He said, that's a quote. Here are the other things that the Orleans Parish School Board currently does not have in place, which would be required for schools. There's no staff nor policies to handle the centralized enrollment system. There's no staff to handle the centralized expulsion process. There's no staff to handle the truancy center. There's no staff to implement the therapeutic settings for students that they need. There's no policies in place nor staff to handle if a charter operator is not doing well and we have to bring in a new one, which is something that actually happened recently that I was part of that needs to be done when our schools aren't doing when our operators aren't doing what they need to be doing, and we need to bring another one in, which happened in my area recently. None of those are in place. If you send the schools back now or within the next year with none of that in place, it will be a complete and utter disaster. I will also show you that there's consensus in New Orleans that the people of New Orleans are not in favor of returning. You heard, I think Representative Carter mentioned the Cowan Institute poll. 1/3 of the respondents only, less than 1/3 of the respondents thought it was time. That means 2/3 believe it's not yet time to bring the schools back. 22% of the voters thought that we need to look at whether or not we need an elected school board or something else when we bring them back. That's a different question. This included also 60% African Americans who participated in the poll. Only 37% favored returning, which means almost 2/3 of African Americans also did not favor returning. There was also a vote recently dealing with the schools where people in New Orleans had to vote on whether they were going to incur another property tax to go into school buildings so we could keep up our schools. That money would have been shared equally by OPSB, RSD, and the charter schools, depending on which facility was operated by which entity. It passed overwhelmingly throughout the city, almost 60-40, and it passed in every Orleans Parish School Board district. Everyone across the city voted for it. And that money was going not only to OPSB, but to RSD and charter schools, and people overwhelmingly supported it. And here's the one that, to me, should end all discussion. There were 33 schools in New Orleans. There are 2 in Baton Rouge, which would make it 35 out of 36 that were eligible. Let me just talk about the ones in New Orleans. There are 33 out of 34 eligible schools that voted not to return. So there were 34 eligible schools in New Orleans that could have chosen to return to OPSB. Their board, based on responses they got from their principal, their teachers, their parents, and their students, said we do not want to go back at this time. 33 out of 34.
We have some questions.
I'm almost done.
All right.
Because I think this is the most critical part, because it shows that the people in New Orleans don't think they should go back yet. It's across the entire city. I have the chart here. 56% of our charter school board members are African American. We have overwhelmingly African American boards that comprise our charter schools, including Sophie B. Wright in my district. They voted not to return, and here's their principal's quote by Sharon Clark. When all these communities and parents are taking a vote, they're not returning. They sent out 550 questionnaires to their parents, students, staff, and community members. Only 7 out of 550 wanted to return. Eileen Williams, who is the chief executive and principal of another school, the Harney School, whose father, by the way, was the first African-American superintendent of OPSB, her father, she voted not to return. She is quoted, "She loves Orleans Parish. We were very bitter after the storm when the state swooped in, but she recommended that Harney stay with the recovery system. The school board is still bickering. 20 years down the road, we're still having foolish arguments," Williams said, "and we've hit our stride as a charter." She did not want to return. I would add that Representative Bowie actually has 7 of the 8 schools in his district were eligible to return. Guess what? All 7 voted to stay with RSD. This is not an Uptown, an Algiers, a Gentilly, a New Orleans East issue. There is consensus across everyone in Orleans Parish and all the schools that they're not ready to return. And I would ask you at this point to give the school board and the superintendent the time that they need to do this right before we send the schools back. Mr. Speaker, I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Representative Smith for a question on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Aberson, in the bill, are these schools expected to go back immediately?
Under the bill, they have to go back within 1 year of being eligible to go back. Some of these schools have been eligible to go back for several years, it's not clear under the bill, and I'm not sure if Representative Bowie's considered this or not, but some of them might have to go back the day after this bill becomes effective if it were to pass, because they've been eligible for longer than a year.
So you don't look at it as being a year of preparation for Orleans to be able to take schools back, rather than looking at it from the aspect of a year after they're ready to go back, because that could have happened a long time ago anyway, based on the way the structure is for schools to go back.
Based on the way the structure is, an eligible school that's no longer failing has to vote every year. And
Exactly
some of them have voted year after year after year not to go back.
And I've also heard, and you may tell me if I'm right or not, that many of these charters feel comfortable under RSD because it's so close to Bessie. And they can get whatever they want when they want it, and just don't want to go back to a structured situation such as OPSB. So what about situations like that? Because I've heard that in conversation.
Well, first of all, I'm not sure I would call OPSB structured, because I think most people would think it's not structured, and that's the problem with sending them back now is it's completely disorganized, and the superintendent himself has said he doesn't have everything in place to take the schools back. But addressing your point as to whether or not the charter schools feel like they can get away with something being on the RSD that they couldn't get away from an OPSB, no. Everyone I've talked to doesn't want to go back at this time because OPSB doesn't have the system in place to take them back. OPSB has struggled over the last number of years to get their circumstances straight, and they're not there yet. Matter of fact, we even have 2 OPS board members who voted against support. So we don't even have all the Orleans Parish School Board members who would be in charge of the schools saying that they're ready, which is, to me, is significant. Can you imagine voting in this body that you're not ready to take on a state legislative task? To me, that's...
It was two, and the majority voted, so it's a democracy. I mean, that happens in most school board situations. You don't always get a majority vote because somebody has a reason why they don't want to vote for it.
I would agree with that, but this has to do with whether or not they wanted to exercise their authority that they were elected to do, and 2 of the 5 said they weren't ready.
Well, I just believe that RSD is supposed and was supposed to be a very temporary entity. I also believe, very strongly that RSD right now is overstaffed, because with no traditionally run schools under the RSD jurisdiction, it is overstaffed. and there should be some revisiting of how RSD is really looked at right now, since they're nothing but charter schools in the area with their own governing board. And I think that Orleans ought to say something about that aspect as well, because you don't need a superintendent and 50 people to oversee the charters in Orleans. Did you know?
Well, and I'm not up here defending everything that RSD does and whether or not we need to make some reforms there. And so don't mistake my comments as that. What we're up here debating is whether should be sending these charter schools back against their wishes, the parents' wishes, the teachers' wishes, and even the superintendent's wishes at this point, to a system that's not ready to take them.
Then Landry for a question. Nancy?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Abramson, the graduation rates in New Orleans before the Recovery School District took over, I read this in an article in the paper this weekend, were below 50%. Isn't that right?
I don't have any reason to disagree with you, but I don't know the statistics.
And now, under the Recovery School District, they're touting a 73% graduation rate. And for black males, it's higher than the state average, and it's the first time in, I think, many decades that they've had a graduation rate, or it's the highest graduation rate they've ever had, actually, under the Recovery School District.
Yeah, the schools are doing extremely well. We're moving in the right direction, and everybody's happy with it. Everybody's pleased with the direction.
And the governing bodies of schools, they're designed to serve the parents and the children and the community. Isn't that correct?
To me, the people we're concerned about are the kids.
Right.
We want to make sure they get a quality education. We want to put them in the best school that we can to have that done. The system seems to be working much better now. The schools are on the right path. I don't think we want to do anything to disrupt that right now.
And nationally, around the country, the Recovery School District is a model. It's being, similar legislation is being enacted in other states around the country because of the success that we've had in New Orleans under the Recovery School District in turning around an urban district. And that model, that portfolio model of school governance now is seen as a model and way to turn around an urban school district that's in decline and that's mired in dysfunction and leaves kids languishing in failing schools. Isn't that right? Did you know that other states were enacting similar legislation so that they can have the same kind of success in their urban school districts?
I did. Thank you for bringing that up.
Gentleman's out of time.
Thank you.
Representative LaBalle for a question. The gentleman's out of time. You give him an additional 3 minutes.
You got it.
Without objection.
Okay.
Thank you, Representative LaBalle, for that extra time.
Okay. Thank you. Neil, Nancy brought up the point of the graduation rate of the recovery schools. Do we know what the graduation rate of the non-recovery schools, is it going up or going down?
I can't answer that.
Okay. Now, does this bill move all of the recovery school back in the fold, or does it remove just some of them back in?
It would return all the non-failing schools. We do have some schools that would remain in the RSD because they're still failing from an accountability standpoint.
Okay, do you have numbers on those?
I think we have about, Representative Bowie probably has, we have about 60 schools, and we're talking about 33 or 34. We have 68, and we're talking about 33, 34 that have currently voted not to return. So that would be the difference.
Okay, now.
I'm a lawyer, not a mathematician, so about 33, 34.
Okay.
34.
Now, how many are currently under the regular school board?
The regular school board has some traditional schools still with it, and which is about 5 or 6. And 14 charters, but it's got some traditional ones that are still with it, and then in addition it has 14 charters like Lusher and Ben Franklin and some other schools which are outstanding schools and never left the OPSB.
Okay, so they're basically have 20 schools under their jurisdiction.
That's about right, correct.
And then they would be over doubling.
Yes.
We
would be potentially overnight, depending on how you interpret the bill, but at least within a year, Some of them have been eligible for a couple years, so if it's within a year of them being eligible, they've been eligible for 3 years, they might have to go back tomorrow. We'd be going from 20 to 54. And the superintendent has said over and over again that they're not ready.
There's no way they can adjust it to move a smaller amount?
I mean, the guy who's in charge, who was brought in a few months ago, says they're not ready. And we're about to double the number of schools that they have to deal with.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Representative James, the gentleman's out of time. You give him an additional 3 minutes? Without objection.
2 minutes, that's all I need, Mr. Speaker.
All right, 2 minutes.
30 seconds.
Better.
No.
Chairman Abramson, you talked about the court cases, and the cases currently in which court?
The case I was referring to was the case that came out of the 19th JDC, went to the Louisiana First Circuit Court of Appeal.
So did they appeal that?
Yeah, they took it up to the Louisiana Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court denied writs.
Denied writs, okay. Well, that ends that line of question.
Yeah.
My second line of questioning, with the, you talked about all the support that they have, and they've been voting with the charter management boards, but the school board, aren't the school board members in New Orleans are elected by the people, right?
Correct.
What about those management boards for the charters? Are they elected by the people or selected by the charter management groups?
They're not elected by the people. They're selected by the charter schools.
So wouldn't you think that the school board is a better reflection of the voice of the people of New Orleans since they're elected and not appointed?
No.
Thank y'all.
Representative Marino for a question.
No, you don't.
No, because the choice of the choice of the people are the people. The people are the ones that are on the charter school. Make no mistake that the people that are on these charter school boards are moms and dads, fathers and mothers, aunts and uncles. These are constituents of New Orleans.
So you think
these are the actual people, and they are voting themselves not to return. And I'm not talking about 50-50. 33 out of 34, and it's white, it's African American, it's uptown,
I understand
it's
that,
New
but you
Orleans
don't-
East, it's all across the city.
You don't think that an elected body of a municipality is a stronger voice for a community than a board that's probably picked by a bunch of friends of the folks that run the organization? You don't think that the elected school board is a more reflective voice of the community because these people went out and they sought the support of the community and the people voted for them and put them in their body and they trust them to make the decisions as opposed to some board that was just appointed?
No, not in this situation because it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming in every community, every demographic, and I've quoted you to people, and I've got the list of all of the
I heard
charter
your
schools.
list. I just disagree. Did you know? I think that an elected school board is a greater representation of a district, and we keep talking about the RSD in New Orleans, but we have some RSD schools in Baton Rouge as well, and I think that this bill will help us out with the situation that we have with the RSD holding our schools hostage and not even putting kids there, just leaving space and allowing buildings to become dilapidated, and now we have millions of dollars that we owe to repair those schools. So I want you to remember that RSD, we have schools in Baton Rouge too, and it's not just a New Orleans problem, did you know?
All right, Representative James, you're out of time. Representative Marino
Thank
for
you,
a
Mr.
question.
Speaker.
Gentleman's out of time.
I do.
Give him additional 2 minutes without objection.
And actually, I'm going to just be very brief. It'll be mostly like a minute. Representative Abramson, you said something earlier today, and it caught my attention. You said you don't think the schools should go back yet. And I think your point there was that, look, we all want our schools back. You're just concerned about just the timing of doing it so immediately. Is that correct?
That's correct. The time is not now. Now the question becomes, well, when is it? Let's let the superintendent and the school board get their house straight, get the policies and procedures in place. Let's let the parents, the students, the principals get comfortable with what they're doing, and then I do think the time will come to move back to a local governing authority, whatever that may be.
I will say this, though, and I have to commend Representative Bowie for bringing this bill, because I do think that with this particular instrument, I think whether it passes or it doesn't, we do set up that conversation to move the process along faster. And like I said, whether it passes or not, whatever happens, at home, I think that the board will move faster, superintendent will move faster, and we'll start building that real plan that we need to bring our schools back. Would you agree?
I would agree. If Representative Bowie's bill can get the superintendent and the school board moving so that we can get things in place, yes, that would be a definitely positive that would come out of this.
And that's how I feel as well. You know, it's the overall timing that I'm concerned about and the preparation. And I think there's a way to do it quickly and to do it right, but it's just setting all of that in motion. Thank you, Representative Abrams.
Thank you, Representative Moreno.
Representative Theory, the gentleman's out of time. You give an additional 2 minutes without objection.
Representative Aberson, one of your arguments in your opposition was that you felt that the superintendent stated that he wasn't ready to take on these additional schools. What do you think is the duties of a superintendent?
To manage the schools that are under the school board's authority.
So if these schools end up transitioning under his authority, don't you think it's his responsibility to do the job?
I do. I hope he does.
So,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh. Well, that's what I was going to say. So it's really not up to him whether or not how he feels or if he feels like he wants to do the job. It's really his job to do that, right?
It's his job to do it, but I think the purpose of my comments was to whether or not he's gotten far enough along. And it's not his fault. He just got there. And so everybody has very high expectations for him. Everybody's optimistic about him. But I think he's realistic to know that in the current status that they're not ready, and he has a lot of work to do in order for us to get ready.
So when will he be ready? Did y'all ever have that discussion?
No, he hasn't stated yet. And I'm not sure that he can give us a time frame. I think it's a work in progress because he has a lot of work to do.
So should we just take the assumption that he's never going to be ready, or he basically just likes the job that he has?
No, he better be ready. My position is he better be ready at some point, and I'm hoping and I believe that he will do his job, and I hope he do it as quickly as possible. We just know that they're not there yet.
Okay, and my next question is, when we speak about currently RSD doesn't have any direct oversight over these schools, right? Do you have any evidence? I know there's a fear that if we transition these schools from RSD to the local public school in Orleans Parish, your fear is that the graduation rates may decline or the passing rates. Is that something that you talked about, I think, in your opposition?
I didn't. I think Representative Landry had some quotes from some numbers. I didn't mention anything about graduation rates. My concern is that the organization that manages and oversees the schools has to be ready to take the kids back. There's a litany of things from an organizational and a management standpoint that OPSB and the superintendent just aren't prepared yet for, that they have a lot of work to get prepared for.
But we really don't have any facts, is what I'm saying. Is there any evidence that would lead us to believe that if they make the transition that they can't be just as successful as they have been, being that RSD doesn't have current oversight over them at this point anyway?
I don't think we'll know until it happens. The problem is our students are too important to us to roll the dice.
Well, I don't think it's rolling the dice. What I'm saying is would you agree with me that RSD doesn't currently have any direct oversight over any of these schools? That's the testimony they gave to us in the Appropriations Committee, is that they have there's zero oversight. And in fact, their real responsibility is oversight over the construction projects, is what they told us. So with that being said, then what I would agree with, and hopefully you can see where I'm going with this, is that if they don't currently have any direct oversight and the charter schools are actually managing the RSD schools, then what would be the difference if we're returning it back to the locals?
The difference is that Orleans Parish School Board and the superintendent don't have the policies and procedures and staff and everything in place to deal with the things that RSD does for the charter schools. And I listed a whole bunch of it.
But I just stated to you, RSD does not have, they stated they don't have any
you're
oversight.
out of time.
Yeah, but Representative Theory, I gave you the list of things that RSD does that OPSB does not and cannot do. No staff, no policies to handle centralized enrollment. No staff to handle centralized expulsion. No staff to handle the truancy centers. No staff to handle therapeutic settings for students. They have no policies and procedures to remove a charter operator who's not doing well and bring in one that are working well, which the RSD, to their benefit, just did in my area where we had a school that wasn't doing well and we had to replace them, and we went in and we replaced them. So there are a number of things that OPSB is currently not prepared to do that RSD does do for the charter schools.
Well, I think we're going to disagree, and I would suggest that the superintendent get to work. Thank you.
Representative Norton, the gentleman's out of time. You give an additional 2 minutes without objection. Representative Norton, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm amazed about them 2 minutes, but thank you anyway. Tell me a little bit about your statement related to the case that's in court, related to the violation that is already in place. You made mention, I couldn't hardly hear you about there was a case in court related to this process of being in violation.
Yeah, I wanted to just get the legal argument out of the way that the current system that RSD and Bessie is working under in terms of how the schools return to OPSB, which is by vote of the charter schools, they determine whether or not they want to go back or not. That was challenged in court, and the court upheld the system, that it was not a violation of law nor the Constitution.
So you're saying now that they are not in violation? Is that what you're saying because of the court case?
Correct.
So in other words, what the legislature put in place, the court overruled the legislature, the bill that was implemented to say that they are no longer out of compliance. They are in compliance now. Is that what you said the court ruled?
No, the court just ruled that it was constitutional, the procedure that Bessie set up to determine when the schools would go back to OPSB.
So Bessie have the authority to overrule the legislature?
No, they don't. The legislature gave Bessie the authority. Bessie exercised it, and the court said that was acceptable under the statutes and the Constitution.
Okay, so at this particular time, the word out of compliance is not relative anymore because of what Bessie did. Is that correct?
I'm not sure how you're using the word out of compliance.
Well, I'm saying that it was said that they were in violation. They were in violation. Then Bessie came and made a ruling. So when Bessie came and made the ruling, they were no longer in violation. That's what I'm asking you.
I think if I understand your question, the Bessie procedure that's been set up has been held by the court to be constitutional.
So again, the legislature decision is no longer in place because of what ruling that Bessie made.
No, the legislature decision is in place. We delegated some of the authority to Bessie, and quite frankly, what Representative Bowie's bill does is legally correct. He's trying to remove from Bessie that authority that the legislature gave it and make the legislative decision for everybody and return to schools. So the current system is not unconstitutional or illegal. The right way to go about the process is what Representative Bowie's doing, is just to change the law.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
All right. Representative Bowie, to close on your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me just reiterate a couple of points that are really important for this body to remember. And in spite of what was just presented, there are some facts that I need to share so you can be clear. There's an assumption that when the schools return, that the schools will go back to the old system. That is not the truth. We've already established that, in fact, it is not RSD that is responsible for the success and progress of those schools. It's the charter associations. They go back with the schools. The first thing I want to impress upon this body, though, is that your constituents voted for a return of school process that had two steps. One, when schools become non-failing, they go back to the local district. Here's the other thing that has been misconceived and presented here. Let's look at the condition of Orleans Parish School Board. Orleans Parish School Board has 14 charters. Here is the condition of those charters under Orleans Parish School Board. In 2012, they earned the letter grade of A. One of 7 districts in the state. Their district performance score in 2012 was 133.8. In 2013, they earned a letter grade A. One of 9 districts in the state. Their district performance scores was 108.2. And in 2014, these are facts. I have them. You can check them yourself. A letter grade of A. One of 10 districts in the state, district performance score of 109.2. OPSB is a successful charter school authorizer. It has a record of respecting charter school autonomy, and it is transparent and accountable local governance. And here is the real question. Everyone says we want the schools back, but the time is not now. Members of the committee asked the superintendent of RSD, when do you think the schools will be ready to go back? There was no answer. But let me share with you what I think about immediately when people say to me the time is not now. I think about what segregationists used to say with the Civil Rights Act, that the time is not now. This state implemented in 2003 a recovery model, and it had a return of school policy. You have just heard that that policy is totally different from what the people of this state voted for. So I would ask you to do what you would expect be done to your municipality if your schools were being warehoused by RSD. And do what the people of Louisiana voted for in 2003. Let those schools return when they're not failing. Thank you very much.
All right, Representative Bowie moves the final passage of the bill. As many of you favor final passage, vote yes. Those opposed, vote no. The clerk will open the machine. Members, vote your machines. Representative Burns, no. Representative Jefferson, yes. Representative Burford, no. Representative Jackson, yes. Representative Adams, no. Are you through voting? Are you through voting? Representative Gwynn, no. Are you through voting? The clerk will close the machine. 31 yeas and 60 nays, and the bill failed to pass. Representative Abramson moves to reconsider the vote.